I want to talk today, obviously, about Celtic Christianity, but in particular about thin places. As I mentioned before, Celtic Christianity is being rediscovered in our time. Celtic Christianity is a form of Christianity which flourished in Ireland and parts of Scotland, Wales and Northern England, at the beginning of the 5th century. And the metaphor of thin places is one which features a lot in Celtic Christianity. The metaphor thin places has its home in a particular way of thinking about God, and deeply rooted in the Christian tradition, this way of thinking understands God as the encompassing spirit in which everything is. God is not somewhere else, but right here. According to Paul, God is the one in whom we live and move and have our being. In other words, we are in God. We move and have our being in God. God is a non-material layer of reality all around us, right here, as well as more than here. This way of thinking affirms that there are two dimensions of reality: the visible world of our ordinary everyday experience and the spiritual dimension. But although God is everywhere and in everything, we often don't experience this. We don't see it. But occasionally we do see it. We do experience God shining through everything. Thin places. Thin places are places where the two levels of reality meet or intersect. They are places where the boundary between the two levels of reality become very soft and porous. Thin places can literally be geographical places. For Celtic Christianity, the island of Iona, off the west coast of Scotland, is a classic thin place, and I'm sure some of you have been there. So also are traditional destinations of religious pilgrimage, as are often high mountains. But the metaphor thin places refers to more than geographical locations. A thin place is a place or means by which the sacred becomes present to us. There are many kinds of thin places. Some are secular, like nature, like the old lady in the croft, enjoying nature. And then there are the arts, music, poetry, literature. These can all become thin places. And people themselves can become thin places. Many of us have known at least one or two people in our lives where in their company we have experienced the presence of the Spirit. Also, church services have the potential to become thin places. Indeed, this is one of their primary purposes. Worship may be directed to God, but it is in a very important sense for us, directed to God but for us. Worship is about creating a sense of the sacred, a thin place. The use of sacred words, rituals, and sacraments create a sense of another world. Sermons can become thin places as well, but to be honest, they don't always do so. And likewise, the primary role of music, whether performance or participatory, is to become a thin place. And many people report being moved more by hymn singing than any other elements of the worship service. And the hymns which do this the best tend to combine two features: words which move us and music that can be sung easily. For Christians, the great festivals of the church year, Easter and Christmas, are often experienced as thin places. And people, as you know, attend these services in greater numbers, not simply for conventional reasons, but because they move us. They seem to touch our hearts. In his poem, Tintern Abbey, the poet Wordsworth suggests how nature offers access to the sublime, the mystery of life. And I quote his words: "I have felt a presence that disturbs me with joy, of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime, of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean, and the living area, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and in spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of thought, and rolls through all things. Therefore am I still a lover of the meadows and the woods, and mountains, and of all that we behold, from this green earth, of all the mighty world, of eye and ear." Those of you who have visited the Lake District will have had some experience of that. The immense awe which Wordsworth feels upon being in this natural setting grants him greater insight into the connection and unity between humanity, the natural world, and the universe, just like the widow in the croft did. Such experience, such feeling, the poet argues, can even allow people to transcend their earthly bodies altogether. How do we become open to and nourished by this mystery, in whom we live and move and have our being? By spending some time in thin places, whether alone or as part of a group. I'm sure you've all heard the saying, you're closer to God in the garden than anywhere else. Might this also be our experience? When you turn up here on a Sunday, is it simply habit? Or is it because of the people who gather here, people you've known over the years? Or might there be some other reason? Might it be that from time to time you yourself experience something of these thin places right here? I close today's reflection with the words of a theologian, Frederick Buchner. He's an American writer, and he tells us this: pay attention, because God is constantly at work in our lives. Pay attention, because God is constantly at work in our lives. Think of the old woman at the croft, sitting there, watching, enjoying the environment, being in the moment. Pay attention, because God is constantly at work in our lives.